The sound wasn't loud, but it silenced the entire terminal. Reap! That was the sound of a federal document, a United States passport, being torn in half by a man who thought he was God. He smirked, tossing the blue booklet back at the black woman standing before him, thinking he had just put her in her place. He thought she was just another helpless passenger he could bully. He was wrong. Dead wrong. He didn't know that the woman standing there wasn't just a traveler. She was a senior FAA inspector on a covert audit, and that fake passport he just destroyed was government property. In the next hour, Brad Halloway's life would dismantle faster than the document he just ripped. This is the story of how arrogance met the ultimate federal karma. The fluorescent lights of Terminal C at Chicago O'Hare hummed with that familiar headache-inducing frequency. It was 6:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, the lull before the late-night red-eye rush. Dr. Regina Cross adjusted the strap of her worn leather tote bag. She looked tired, deliberately so. She wore a grey, oversized hoodie sweatpants that had seen better days, and her hair was pulled back in a messy, unassuming bun. To the casual observer, she looked like a stressed mother, or perhaps a student heading home for the holidays on a budget ticket. That was the point. Regina was neither. She was the regional director for the Federal Aviation Administration's Office of Audit and Evaluation. But today, she was just Regina, a passenger in Group 4 economy class aboard Stratton Airways Flight 394, bound for Atlanta. Stratton Airways had been flagging the FAA's internal dashboard for months. Complaints of discriminatory screening practices, arbitrary denials of boarding, and aggressive gate agents had spiked by 200% in the last quarter. The reports were consistent. Minority women, specifically. Black women. Traveling alone were being targeted for additional screening that often resulted in them missing their flights. Regina wasn't there to read reports anymore. She was there to be the bait. She stood in line, clutching her boarding pass and her passport. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the podium. There were 2 agents working the gate. One was a young woman named Sarah, who looked exhausted and kept her head down, scanning passes robotically. The other was the man Regina had read about in 3 separate complaints, Brad Halloway. He was a tall man, heavy-set, with a Stratton Airways vest that strained at the buttons. He stood not behind the podium, but in front of it, legs spread wide in a power stance, watching the line like a prison warden. He wasn't smiling. He was hunting. Group 1 and 2 only. Brad barked, his voice unnecessarily loud for the small crowd. If you are in Group 3 or 4, step back. Do not crowd the boarding area. I will send you to the back of the line if you crowd my gate. Regina watched as an elderly white couple in Group 3 stepped forward confusedly. Brad's demeanor softened instantly. Just a moment, folks. We'll get you on board shortly, he said with a practiced, oily customer service smile. 2 minutes later, a young black man in a business suit approached with a Group 1 boarding pass. Brad stepped directly in his path. Bag? Brad said, pointing a finger. Excuse me, the man asked. Your bag, it's too big. Sizer, now. The man sighed, clearly used to this, and placed his slim leather briefcase into the metal sizer. It fit with room to spare. Brad frowned, clearly annoyed that he couldn't gate-check it. ID. The man handed over his license. Brad scrutinized it for a full 30 seconds, bending it slightly, looking at the hologram, then looking back at the man's face. Finally, he shoved it back. Go. Regina felt the cold simmer of anger in her gut. She had seen enough to file a report already, but she needed the smoking gun. She needed him to violate protocol in a way that couldn't be explained away as diligence. She waited until Group 4 was called. The line shuffled forward. Regina made sure to look slightly confused, fumbling a bit with her documents as she approached the scanner. She wanted to appear weak. Bullies like Brad couldn't resist weakness. When she reached the front, Sarah, the young agent, reached for her pass. "I got this one, Sarah," Brad interrupted, his voice booming. He physically nudged his co-worker aside and loomed over Regina. "Boarding pass and he demanded, not making eye contact. Regina handed them over. "Here you go. I'm just trying to get home to my sister," she added, adding a tremble to her voice. Brad looked at the boarding pass. Then he looked at the passport. It was her official diplomatic passport, the one issued to high-ranking federal officials for travel, but she had placed it inside a generic, worn-out cover. Brad pulled it out of the cover. He saw the black cover of the diplomatic passport, but he didn't seem to recognize the significance. Or perhaps his bias blinded him to it. He flipped it open. He looked at the photo, Regina looking professional and sharp. He looked at Regina in front of him. Hoodie, sweatpants, tired. "This isn't you," Brad said, tossing the passport onto the counter with a clatter. The trap was set. The air around the gate seemed to drop 10 degrees. The passengers behind Regina shuffled awkwardly, sensing the confrontation. "Excuse me," Regina asked, her voice quiet. "That is certainly me. I'm just dressed for travel, sir." "Don't give me that," Brad sneered. He picked the passport up again, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated. "The woman in this photo is professional. You look like you just rolled out of bed. And this passport type, official government travel." "Yeah, right." He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Where did you buy this Canal Street? It's a good fake, I'll give you that. But Stratton Airways doesn't fly fakes." "Sir," Regina said, her voice hardening just a fraction, "I advise you to look at the holographic overlay on the data page. Scan the chip. That is a valid United States diplomatic passport. Denying me boarding based on your inability to identify a federal document is a violation of 14 CFR Part 382 and several other statutes." Brad's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the jargon. He didn't like that she wasn't crying or begging. He leaned over the podium, invading her personal space. "Listen to me," he hissed loud enough for the first 10 people in line to hear. "I don't care what numbers you throw at me. I run this gate. I decide who is a threat. And someone claiming to be a government official looking like you, that's a threat. That's fraud. Check the system," Regina commanded. She dropped the act of the tired traveler. She stood to her full height. Brad's ego couldn't take the challenge. He felt the eyes of the crowd. He felt his authority wavering. He needed a show of force. "You want me to check?" Brad yelled. "I'll check this garbage right into the trash." He gripped the passport with both hands. "Sir, do not do that," Regina warned, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "That is federal property. Tampering with it is a felony under 18 U.S. Code Section 1543. "I'm protecting my flight," Brad roared. "Rap!" The sound was sickening. The laminated data page of the passport, constructed of multiple layers of security mesh and polycarbonate, was tough. But Brad was fueled by adrenaline and rage. He twisted and tore, separating the binding from the cover, snapping the biometric chip antenna. He held up the 2 mangled halves of the booklet like a trophy. "There," Brad spat. "Now nobody is flying. Get out of my line before I call the police." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah, the other gate agent, had her hands over her mouth, her face pale as a sheet. The passengers were frozen. Regina didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply looked at the destroyed document in his hands, and then up at his face. She reached into her tote bag. Brad flinched, stepping back. "She's reaching for a weapon." "Security!" he screamed. Regina slowly pulled out a leather bifold wallet. She flipped it open. A gold badge caught the overhead lights gleaming with undeniable authority. Next to it was a laminated ID card with the seal of the Department of Transportation. "I don't need you to call the police, Mr. Holloway," Regina said, her voice projecting to the back of the terminal. "I already triggered the silent alarm on my phone 3 minutes ago. But since you asked," she pointed a finger at him, "you are under arrest for the destruction of federal property interference with a federal aviation inspector and violation of civil rights. Sit down. Now." Brad stared at the badge. He looked at the ripped passport in his hands. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. You're," he stammered. "I am the person who is about to end your career," Regina said. "And I'm going to make sure the whole world knows why." At that moment, 3 TSA agents and 2 Chicago police officers came sprinting down the concourse radios, crackling. "Officer," Regina barked, turning to the lead cop without lowering her badge. "Secure this man. He has just destroyed a diplomatic passport and is currently obstructing a federal audit." Brad Holloway dropped the pieces of the passport. They hit the floor with a pathetic flutter. He looked at Sarah, begging for backup. Sarah looked at him, looked at the furious woman with the badge, and took a decisive step away from him. "I told him," Sarah whispered loud enough to be heard. "I told him to stop profiling." "You're done, Brad," Regina said, stepping over the velvet rope to stand on his side of the podium. "But don't worry. The paperwork I'm about to file on you will be longer than the flight to Atlanta." The clicking of handcuffs is a distinct sound. It is sharp, mechanical, and final. For Brad Holloway, a man who had spent the last 15 years treating the gate area like his personal fiefdom, the sound was deafening. Officer Miller, a 20-year veteran of the Chicago PD airport unit, didn't use a gentle touch. He yanked Brad's arms behind his back, forcing the heavy-set man to bend forward over the counter where he had just been reigning supreme. "You're making a mistake," Brad sputtered, his face pressed against the cool laminate. "She's a fraud. Look at her clothes. She's probably high. You have the right to remain silent." Officer Miller droned, tightening the cuffs until Brad winced. "I suggest you use it. You just destroyed federal property in front of 2 officers and 50 witnesses." Regina stood calmly to the side, carefully placing the torn halves of her passport into an evidence bag provided by the TSA supervisor. She sealed it with a snap. She wasn't yelling anymore. She was in full auditor mode, cold, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. "I want the station manager down here," Regina said to the TSA lead, a woman named Officer Hernandez. "And I want the airport security footage from gate C12 for the last 60 minutes pulled and backed up to a secure server. Do not let Stratton Airways IT touch it." "Already on it, ma'am," Hernandez said, respectful but wary. She knew a Fed when she saw one. "Station Manager Tate is on her way." The crowd at the gate had transformed. They were no longer tired passengers. They were an audience. Dozens of phones were held aloft, recording every second. The incident was being live-streamed to TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram before Brad had even been fully Mirandized. "You can't arrest me for doing my job," Brad yelled as Miller hauled him upright. "I have discretion. I suspected a fake ID tool." Regina walked over to him. She didn't get in his face. She stood just outside his personal space, looking at him with pity. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice smooth. Discretion allows you to ask for a second form of ID. It allows you to call a supervisor. It does not allow you to destroy government property. But you didn't do it because you suspected a fake. You did it because you saw a black woman in a hoodie and assumed she was powerless. You assumed I wouldn't fight back. She leaned in closer. I'm not just going to press charges, Brad. I am going to audit every single log entry you have made in the last 5 years. If you have ever denied boarding to anyone else illegally, if you have ever falsified a weight and balance report, if you have ever skipped a mandatory safety briefing, I will find it. And you won't just lose your job. You will lose your pension, your clearance, and your freedom. Brad paled. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like he might faint. Wait, he whispered. My pension. Before Regina could answer, the sound of clicking heels announced the arrival of Linda Tate, the station manager for Stratton Airways at O'Hare. She was a woman who clearly lived in a state of perpetual stress, clutching a walkie-talkie like a lifeline. What is going on here? Linda demanded, breathless. She saw Brad in cuffs, and her eyes went wide. Officer, release my agent immediately. This is a union issue. If there is a dispute with a passenger, we handle it internally. Linda turned to Regina, her eyes raking over the hoodie and sweatpants. And you, I don't know what you said to get him riled up, but if you've caused a scene, you are banned from Stratton Airways. We have zero tolerance for unruly passengers. Regina actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Ms. Tate, is it? Regina asked. I am the station manager, Linda said haughtily. Good. That saves me a trip. Regina pulled a folded document from her back pocket. It wasn't a ticket. It was a Form 110A, Federal Aviation Administration Inspector's credential, and a terrifying piece of paper known as a letter of investigation. I am Dr. Regina Cross, Senior Inspector, Office of Audit and Evaluation, FAA. Your agent just committed a felony against a federal officer, but more importantly for you, Ms. Tate, he just exposed your station to an immediate Level 1 safety and compliance audit. Linda froze. The Level 1 designation was the nuclear option. It meant the FAA could ground planes immediately. It meant they could seize computers. It meant the station was effectively under federal occupation. Dr. Cross, Linda stammered. I didn't know. Clearly, Regina said. Your agent, Mr. Halloway, seems to think compliance is optional. I am here to find out if that attitude comes from the top. Regina pointed to the jet bridge. Nobody boards Flight 394. The aircraft is grounded until I inspect the cabin crew's training logs and the pilot's pre-flight checklist. I have reason to believe your staff is negligent. You can't ground the flight, Linda cried, panic setting in. That's a full 737. The cost. The connections. Mr. Halloway should have thought about that before he ripped up my passport, Regina said icily. Officer Miller, take the suspect away. Ms. Tate, get me a conference room and your flight logs. Now! As Brad was dragged away, weeping openly, now Linda Tate stared at the woman in the grey hoodie. She realized with a sinking heart that the powerhouse of Stratton Airways had just collided with an iceberg, and the ship was already taking on water. 500 miles away, in the glass and steel fortress that was the Stratton Airways headquarters in Dallas, Texas, the atmosphere was usually one of hushed, expensive efficiency. Harrison Sterling, the CEO of Stratton, was a man who prided himself on control. He wore three-piece suits, drank sparkling water, and checked the stock price every 15 minutes. At 7:15 p.m. he was preparing to leave for a charity gala. He was adjusting his cufflinks when his office door burst open. It was Arthur Pendleton, the General Counsel. Arthur was 60 years old, bald, and had the constitution of a shark. He never ran. He never sweated. Today, Arthur was sweating. "Harrison, don't leave." Arthur set his voice tight. "I have the Foundation dinner, Arthur. It's 5,000 a plate. Unless a plane has crashed, it can wait until morning." "A plane hasn't crashed yet," Arthur said, walking over to the massive, flat-screen TV on the wall. "But the stock is about to." He grabbed the remote and cast a video from his tablet to the screen. It was a shaky vertical video shot from a cell phone. It showed a large man in a Stratton vest ripping a blue booklet in half and screaming at a black woman. "So," Harrison shrugged. "Another bad gate agent. We'll fire him, issue a generic apology, and give the passenger a voucher. Why are you bothering me with this?" "Keep watching," Arthur said grimly. On the screen, the woman pulled out the badge. The audio was clear. "I am the person who is about to end your career." Harrison frowned. "Who is she?" "A cop." Arthur tapped the screen. "That is Dr. Regina Cross." Harrison paused. The name sounded familiar. "Cross? Why do I know that name?" "Because 3 years ago, she was the lead inspector on the Sky West audit," Arthur said. "She found the maintenance irregularities in their landing gear systems. She grounded their entire fleet for 3 weeks. Sky West stock dropped 40%. They barely survived." Harrison felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "That's her. The Grim Reaper." "That's her," Arthur confirmed. "And she was traveling undercover on our airline, and our gate agent just ripped up her diplomatic passport, committed a felony, and had her arrested. Wait, no. He got arrested. She is currently holding the O'Hare station hostage." Harrison sat down heavily in his leather chair. "Please tell me she's just a regular inspector." "She was promoted," Arthur said, reading from his tablet. "She is now the Regional Director of Audit and Evaluation. She reports directly to the Secretary of Transportation. Harrison, she has the authority to revoke our operating certificate." The phone on Harrison's desk began to ring. Then his cell phone. Then Arthur's cell phone. "Who is it?" Harrison asked. Arthur checked his phone. "It's the PR firm. The video has 4 million views. Boycott Stratton is trending #1 on Twitter in the US and UK." Harrison grabbed his desk phone. "Get me the O'Hare station manager. Get me Linda Tate." "I tried," Arthur said. "Linda is currently in a conference room with Dr. Cross. She isn't allowed to answer her phone because Dr. Cross has declared the station an active crime scene and an active audit zone." "Jesus Christ," Harrison whispered. He looked at the paused video of Brad Halloway's sneering face. "How much is this going to cost us? If she finds systemic discrimination, if she proves we profile passengers." Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "The fines alone will be in the 9 figures. The lawsuits will be endless. And if she grounds the fleet for a safety review, we'll be insolvent in a month," Harrison finished. He stood up, pacing the room. The arrogance that usually shielded him was gone, stripped away by the reality of the situation. "We need to kill this," Harrison said. "Not the story, the anger. We need to make this right. Get the private jet ready. I'm going to Chicago." "Harrison, you can't just fly in there," Arthur warned. "Regina Cross eats CEOs for breakfast. If you try to bribe her or smooth-talk her, she will add bribery to the list of charges." "I'm not going to bribe her," Harrison said, buttoning his jacket with trembling fingers. "I'm going to beg, and I'm going to personally fire Brad Halloway on national television if I have to." "It might be too late," Arthur said, pointing at the TV. CNN had just picked up the feed. The headline ran across the bottom of the screen in bright red: FAA inspector assaulted by airline staff. Federal investigation launched. Harrison stared at the screen. That idiot at the gate didn't just rip a passport, he muttered. He just ripped up my company. O'Hare's Terminal C, usually a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases and announcements, had gone eerily quiet around Gate C12. The area was now cordoned off with blue tape. But the real action wasn't at the gate. It was in the windowless beige conference room, buried deep within the airport's administrative bowels. Regina Cross sat at the head of the table. She had removed her hoodie, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath, but her authority didn't come from her clothes anymore. It came from the laptop open in front of her, and the team of 4 agents who had just arrived from the FAA Great Lakes Regional Office. They were known as the Red Team. They were the auditors you never wanted to see. They didn't just check boxes. They dismantled operations. Linda Tate, the station manager, sat at the far end of the table, clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. She looked like a ghost. "Dr. Cross," Linda ventured, her voice trembling. "The flight crew for 394. They've been waiting on the jet bridge for 2 hours. The passengers are rioting in the terminal. Can we at least release the aircraft?" Regina didn't look up from her screen. "Agent Vance, what's the status of the cabin crew training logs?" Agent Vance, a man with a buzz cut and zero sense of humor, looked up from a stack of files. "Incomplete, ma'am. The lead flight attendant has a certification gap of 3 months on her emergency evacuation refresher. Technically, she isn't certified to fly this aircraft." Regina finally looked at Linda. Her gaze was heavy. "You want me to release a plane staffed by uncertified crew, Ms. Tate? That's another violation. Add it to the list." Linda put her head in her hands. "It was just a paperwork error." "She took the class. Then show me the proof," Regina said calmly. "Until then, Flight 394 is a lawn ornament." Just then the door opened. A man in a suit worth more than the entire conference room walked in. It was Harrison Sterling, the CEO of Stratton Airways. He looked winded, his tie slightly askew. He had flown in on a private jet and sprinted through the terminal, bypassing his own security. "Dr. Cross," Harrison said, putting on his best boardroom smile, though it didn't reach his terrified eyes. "I'm Harrison Sterling. I wanted to personally apologize for the misunderstanding at the gate." Regina closed her laptop slowly. The room went deathly silent. The Red Team stopped working and watched. "Mr. Sterling," Regina said, standing up. She didn't offer a hand. "You call a felony assault on a federal officer a misunderstanding. I call it the actions of a rogue employee," Harrison said, quickly stepping forward. "Brad Halloway has been terminated effective immediately. We are issuing a public apology. We are prepared to offer you a settlement for the distress." "Stop," Regina said. The word cracked like a whip. "Do not finish that sentence, Mr. Sterling. If you offer me money, I will have you arrested for bribery right here and now." Harrison froze. He realized instantly that Arthur, his lawyer, was right. This woman couldn't be bought. "This isn't about me," Regina continued, walking around the table to face him. "This is about the culture that allowed Brad Halloway to exist. I've been looking at your logs for 2 hours. Do you know what I found?" She gestured to the screen. "I found a pattern. Brad Halloway has randomly selected passengers for additional screening 400 times in the last year. 92% of them were people of color. 85% were women." Harrison paled. I wasn't aware of those statistics. That is your job. Regina slammed her hand on the table, making Linda jump. You are the CEO. Ignorance is not a defense. It is negligence. You let a predator run your gate because he processed passengers quickly. You traded civil rights for turnaround times. Regina leaned in her voice, dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am expanding the audit, Mr. Sterling. We aren't just looking at O'Hare anymore. I'm grounding your flights in Atlanta, Dallas, and Miami until I review their logs, too. You can't, Harrison whispered, horrified. That will bankrupt us. Then you better hope your other station managers are better at their jobs than Ms. Tate, Regina said. Agent Vance, get the Miami logs. We're going to be here all night. The sun was rising over Chicago, casting a grey light into the conference room. The coffee was stale. The air was thick with the smell of stress and printer toner. Harrison Sterling hadn't left. He sat in the corner watching his empire crumble in real time on his phone. The stock had plummeted 18% since the market opened. Regina was tired, but she was in the zone. She was looking for the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that proved this wasn't just incompetence, but malice. Dr. Cross, said Agent Sarah Jenkins, the team's digital forensics expert. I think I found something in the internal messaging system, the chat ops channel. Regina wheeled her chair over. Show me. This is a chat log between Brad Halloway and the shift supervisor. A guy named Mike Ross, Jenkins said. It's dated 3 months ago. Regina read the screen. Brad 1402. Hey Mike, got another one complaining about the random check. She's threatening to file a complaint. Mike 1405. Is she a problem profile? Brad 1406. Yeah. Single female attitude group 4. Mike 1407. Just deny her boarding. Mark it as disruptive behavior. I'll approve it. We need to clear the gate for the inbound from Denver. Don't let these people slow us down. Regina felt a chill. Problem profile, she asked. Is that official terminology? I searched the employee handbook, Jenkins said, shaking her head. It's not there, but I did a keyword search on their server. The phrase problem profile appears in internal emails between station managers in 3 different hubs. Regina stood up. This was it. It's not just bias, Regina said, her voice ringing with vindication. It's cooled. They developed a shorthand for discriminating against passengers they deemed low value or unlikely to sue. They systematized it to speed up boarding. She turned to Harrison Sterling. He looked like he was about to be sick. Did you know about the problem profile code, Mr. Sterling? Regina asked. Harrison shook his head frantically. No, I swear, I've never heard that term. Then you have lost control of your company, Regina said. Agent Vance, print those logs. We have conspiracy to violate civil rights. This just went from a regulatory fine to a Department of Justice referral. Linda Tate began to sob quietly at the end of the table. I didn't know they called it that. I just told them to hurry up. And that's why you're complicit, Regina said. She picked up her phone. She dialed a number she had on speed dial, the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. This is Senior Inspector Cross, she said into the phone. I need you to issue a warrant for the seizure of Stratton Airways' internal servers. Yes, all of them. We found a systemic conspiracy to defraud and discriminate, and I have the logs to prove it. She hung up and looked at the devastated room. The audit was over. The war had begun. "Mr. Sterling," Regina said, gathering her things, "I suggest you call your board of directors. You have a very long day ahead of you." As Regina walked out of the conference room, leaving the wreckage of corporate negligence behind her, she finally felt the weight of the last 24 hours lift. She checked her pocket. The torn passport was still there, a reminder. They thought she was a problem profile. They were about to learn she was the solution, the Everett M. Dirksen, U.S. courthouse in downtown Chicago is a monolith of glass and steel, a place where careers go to die, and where the federal government exerts its ultimate will. On the morning of the trial, the plaza outside was a circus. News vans from CNN, Fox, and MSNBC lined the curbs, their satellite dishes pointed like accusations at the sky. A crowd of protesters held signs that read, "Respect the badge," "Flying while black," and "Justice for Dr. Cross." Inside courtroom 1803, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air conditioning was humming, but it did nothing to cool the sweat beading on Brad Halloway's forehead. Brad sat at the defense table, a stark contrast to the tyrant who had ruled Gate C-12 6 months ago. The prison diet had stripped 30 pounds from his frame, leaving his skin hanging loosely around his neck, his cheap, court-appointed suit bunched at the shoulders. He didn't look like a gate agent anymore. He looked like a man who had been chewed up by the machinery of his own arrogance. His attorney, a weary public defender named Alan Finch, shuffled papers with the enthusiasm of a man who knew he was piloting a plane that had already lost its wings. On the other side of the aisle sat the prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Ross, a shark of a man who had built his career on corruption cases. And behind him, in the first row of the gallery, sat Dr. Regina Cross. She was no longer the grey woman. Today she was undeniable. She wore her full FAA dress uniform, midnight blue, with the gold wings and the Department of Transportation seal pinned over her heart. She sat with a posture so rigid, she looked like a statue carved from judgment itself. She didn't look at Brad. She looked at the judge's empty chair. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honourable Judge Margaret Cole swept into the room. She was a legend in the Northern District, a woman known for sentences that made grown men weep. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the defendant. "Be seated," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. "We are here for the sentencing phase of United States versus Bradley Halloway. The jury has already returned a verdict of guilty on Count 1, destruction of government property. Count 2, interference with federal audit personnel, and Count 3, deprivation of rights under color of law. Mr. Ross, you may proceed with your victim impact statement and final arguments." The prosecution's dagger. David Ross stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked to the center of the well, holding a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside were the 2 jagged halves of a blue diplomatic passport. "Your Honor." Ross began holding the bag up for the jury, though the verdict was already in. This was for the record. This was for the history books. This document is not just paper. It is a symbol of the United States. It represents the trust our government places in its highest officials. It represents safe passage. It represents identity. He turned and walked toward Brad, stopping just feet away from the defense table. 6 months ago, Mr. Halloway decided that he knew better than the United States Department of State. He looked at a high-ranking federal inspector, a woman who has dedicated 20 years of her life to aviation safety, and he saw nothing but a stereotype. Ross turned to the screens mounted on the wall. "Play Exhibit A," he commanded. The courtroom grew deathly silent as the video played. It was the footage from the passenger's phone. The audio was crisp. "I'm protecting my flight." Brad's voice roared from the speakers, filled with misplaced rage. The sound of the passport tearing was sickeningly loud in the acoustic perfection of the courtroom. Brad closed his eyes. He couldn't watch it. He didn't just tear a booklet. "Your Honor," Ross continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "he tore up the Constitution, and thanks to the diligent work of Dr. Cross's Red Team, we know why." Ross clicked a remote. The screen changed. It wasn't the video anymore. It was the internal chat log discovered in Part 6, the Problem Profile Conspiracy. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The press reporters in the back row scribbled furiously. Brad 14, Joe 6. "Yeah, single female attitude group 4, Mike supervisor. Just deny her boarding. Mark it as problem profile. We need to clear the gate." Problem profile. Ross read the words as if they were poisonous. Stratton Airways and Mr. Halloway didn't just discriminate. They industrialized it. They created a code to strip citizens of their rights to save 3 minutes on a departure time. Mr. Halloway wasn't a stressed employee making a mistake. He was a willing executioner in a system of bias. Ross turned back to the judge. "The prosecution asks for the maximum sentence, not just to punish Bradley Halloway, but to send a message to every gate agent, every security guard, and every person in a uniform. You serve the public. You do not own them." The defenses collapse. Alan Finch stood up slowly. He looked tired. "Your Honor," Finch said, his voice pleading, "my client is a broken man. He has lost his job, his pension, his reputation, and his marriage. His wife filed for divorce 2 weeks after the arrest. He is currently living in a temporary housing unit. He was a cog in a machine, Your Honor. Stratton Airways pressured these agents to hit metrics. If they didn't clear the gate on time, they were docked pay. Brad Halloway is a symptom, not the disease." Brad finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. I just wanted to get the plane out," he whispered, breaking protocol. "Mr. Halloway, you will speak when addressed," Judge Cole snapped. Finch sighed. "We ask for leniency. We ask for probation. He has never been in trouble with the law before." Regina's moment. The prosecution calls Dr. Regina Cross to the stand for a victim impact statement, Ross announced. Regina rose. The sound of her uniform moving the starch, the fabric was the only sound in the room. She walked to the stand, swore the oath, and sat down. She didn't look at the lawyers. She looked directly at Brad. "Dr. Cross," the judge asked gently, "is there anything you wish to say to the court?" Regina leaned into the microphone. "Your Honor, for 20 years I have audited airlines. I have crawled into fuel tanks. I have inspected landing gears in freezing rain. I do this because when a plane goes up, the people inside are helpless. They trust us to bring them down safely." She paused, her eyes locking onto Brad's terrified gaze. "Mr. Halloway broke that trust before the plane even left the ground. He looked at me and decided I didn't look like authority. He decided that a black woman in a hoodie could not possibly be a senior federal inspector. That assumption is what I want to address." She took a breath. "I don't want Mr. Halloway to rot in a cell for the rest of his life. That serves no one. But I want him to understand that when he ripped that passport, he didn't just inconvenience me. He signaled to every person who looks like me that our citizenship is conditional, that our credentials are up for debate, that we are problem profiles first and human beings second. She turned to the judge. Justice needs to be absolute, because the next time a gate agent sees a woman like me, I want them to remember this moment. I want them to remember that the person they are bullying might just be the one who signs their paycheck's death warrant. I ask for a sentence that reflects the severity of the betrayal. The judgment judge. Cole interlaced her fingers. She looked at Brad Halloway for a long, uncomfortable minute. Mr. Halloway, please stand. Brad stood up, his legs shaking so badly he had to lean on the table. I have sat on this bench for 15 years, Judge Cole began. I have sent drug dealers, bank robbers, and fraudsters to prison. But your crime disturbs me more than most. She picked up a piece of paper. You acted with the arrogance of a petty tyrant. You treated the rights of a fellow citizen as an obstacle to your lunch break. And when you were caught, you didn't apologize, you lied. You doubled down. On count 1, destruction of government property, I sentence you to 24 months in federal prison. Brad let out a sob. On count 3, deprivation of rights, I sentence you to an additional 24 months to be served consecutively. That is a total of 4 years in the Federal Correctional Institution. 4 years, Brad gasped. No, please, I have kids. You should have thought of them when you were profiling a federal officer, Judge Cole said coldly. Furthermore, upon your release, you are permanently banned from holding any position in the transportation or security sectors. You will not work at an airport, a train station, or even a bus depot. You have forfeited the right to hold authority over others. She banged the gavel. Bail is revoked. Marshals take him into custody. As the marshals grabbed Brad's arms, the reality set in. He wasn't going home. He was going to a federal processing center. He looked back at the gallery, searching for sympathy. He found none. He looked at Regina. Regina simply nodded once. It was a closing of the book, a confirmed audit. The boardroom bloodbath. While Brad was being fitted for an orange jumpsuit, a different kind of execution was happening 800 miles away in Dallas, Texas. The boardroom of Stratton Airways was usually a place of polite conversation and expensive scotch. Today, it was a slaughterhouse. Harrison Sterling, the CEO, sat at the end of the long mahogany table. He was sweating through his bespoke Italian suit. The stock is down 22% in 3 months, said Eleanor Vance, the chairwoman of the board. She threw a thick binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. The FAA just handed us a fine of $150 million. That wipes out our profit for the entire fiscal year. And the DOJ is talking about a consent decree that will have federal monitors in our HR department for a decade. Eleanor, we handled it, Harrison pleaded. We fired Halloway. We apologized. You apologized after you were caught, Eleanor shouted, losing her composure. You allowed a culture where problem profile was acceptable terminology. Do you know who called me this morning? The Secretary of Transportation. He threatened to pull our operating certificate if we didn't clean house. I can fix this, Harrison said, though his voice was weak. You can't, Eleanor said. The Cross Protocol, this new mandate, Regina Cross forced down our throats, requires a leadership change. The FAA doesn't trust you, Harrison, and neither do we. She slid a piece of paper across the table. This is your resignation, effective immediately. You walk away with your base pension, no bonus, no stock options, and you issue a statement taking full personal responsibility. And if I refuse, Harrison asked, then we fire you for cause, we sue you for breach of fiduciary duty, and we let Regina Cross depose you under oath about what you knew and when. Do you want that woman digging through your personal emails, Harrison? Harrison Sterling looked at the paper. He thought about the woman in the grey hoodie. He thought about how he had dismissed the initial report as just a passenger complaint. He took out his Mont Blanc pen and signed. He was a multimillionaire, a titan of industry brought down because he underestimated a woman in sweatpants. 6 months later. The Human Cost FCI Terre Haute is a medium-security federal prison in Indiana. It is cold, grey, and loud. Brad Halloway pushed a mop bucket across the floor of the cafeteria. This was his life now. He wasn't Gate King anymore. He was inmate 49201. He stopped to wipe sweat from his brow. A television was mounted high on the wall playing the news. And in travel news, the FAA reports that passenger complaints regarding discriminatory screening have dropped by 60% since the implementation of the CROSS protocol earlier this year. The new measures championed by director Regina Cross have revolutionized the way. Brad stared at the screen. He saw footage of Regina giving a speech at a podium. She looked powerful, respected. "Hey, move it, Halloway," a guard shouted from the doorway. "That floor isn't going to clean itself." Brad looked at the guard. For a split second, the old anger flared up the urge to yell to assert authority. Then he remembered the sound of the passport ripping. He remembered the gavel. "Yes, sir," Brad said quietly. He dipped the mop into the grey water and kept working. The final scene. The Guardian Regina Cross stood in the terminal of Los Angeles International Airport LAX. It was a Friday night, the busiest time of the week. She wasn't working today. She was flying to Hawaii for a vacation, her first in 5 years. She wore a simple sundress and sandals, carrying a straw hat. She looked like any other tourist. She approached the gate for Oceanic Flight 815. The gate agent was a young man, barely 25, with a messy haircut and a name tag that read Leo. Regina handed him her boarding pass and her brand-new diplomatic passport. Leo scanned the pass. The machine beeped. A red light flashed. Random screening selection. Regina tensed. Her muscles locked up. It was a PTSD response, subtle but real. She waited for the sigh. She waited for the eye roll. She waited for the step aside. Leo looked at the screen. Then he looked at Regina. He didn't frown. He smiled apologetically. "Miss Cross." "I'm so sorry," Leo said genuinely. "The system flagged you for a random check. It's a pain, I know. I can do it right here really quick, or if you prefer, I can get a supervisor to waive it since you're you." He pointed to the passport status on his screen. He knew who she was. Regina exhaled. The tension left her shoulders. "It's okay, Leo," she said softly. "Do the check. Protocol is protocol." Leo did a quick swab of her hands for explosives. He handled her with care, with respect. He treated her like a human being. "You're all clear, ma'am," Leo said, handing her passport back with 2 hands. "Thank you for your service, Director Cross. And thanks for the new rules. It's a lot better working here now. Less yelling." Regina took the passport. She looked out the window at the massive Boeing 777, waiting to take her to paradise. "You're welcome, Leo," she said. She walked down the jet bridge. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The system was fixed. The bully was gone. And for the first time in a long time, the skies felt friendly again. And there you have it, the complete downfall of Brad Halloway and the redemption of a broken system. It's easy to feel like the little guy doesn't have a chance against big corporations or power-tripping officials. But Regina Cross proves that competence documentation and a spine of steel are the ultimate weapons. Brad Halloway ripped up a passport because he thought he was a god at that gate. He didn't realize he was ripping up his own life, his CEO's career, and the toxic culture of an entire airline. The irony is poetic. Brad wanted to stop Regina from flying. In the end, she is flying to Hawaii, and he is barred from entering an airport for the rest of his life. This story is a reminder to everyone watching. Character is how you treat people who can do nothing for you. When you treat people with contempt, you aren't showing power, you're showing weakness. And sometimes that weakness attracts a shark like Regina Cross. If you felt a wave of satisfaction watching justice get served in that courtroom, please hit that like button. It helps get these stories out to more people. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have another story coming next week about a HOA president who tried to tow a FBI surveillance van. You do not want to miss that one. Until then, keep your passport safe, treat people with kindness, and I'll see you in the next video.